Right, ready to jump into this?
Always.
You sent over a whole pack of documents about Northumbrian water,
Yeah.
the privatization back in 1989.
Right. Right in the middle of the Thatcher era in the UK.
Lots of state-run industries moving to private hands.
Exactly.
And you want to know how that worked out for this particular company.
Yeah.
So we're going deep into excerpts from the Northumbrian Water Group PLC offer for sale.
The prospectus.
This prospectus is huge, packed with all the details of the sale.
What's really interesting is Northumbrian Water wasn't just any local utility.
Right.
They handled water and sewage services for a massive part of northeast England.
Yeah.
2.6 million people they served.
That's a lot of people.
Huge infrastructure. Think about it. Over 8,600 kilometers of water mains.
Wow.
And then 12,000 kilometers of sewers.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And it looks like it wasn't just one company managing everything.
Right. So 55% of the people in the region, they actually got their water from local statutory water companies.
Oh, okay.
Not directly from Northumbrian.
So it's like a web of relationships.
Exactly. A complex web. And here's another layer. 2 of those local companies, owned by Lyonnaise des Eaux SA, a French company.
Wow, so it's international.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this public utility suddenly turning into a PLC, a public limited company,
Right.
with shares going up for sale.
Yeah.
What did that shift from public to private actually look like?
Well, the UK government owned it, and they used Schroders to handle the sale.
Okay.
A big chunk of their ownership in Northumbrian was sold off.
Right.
This was called an offer for sale, and it laid out everything investors needed to know.
So the number of shares, the price.
Yep. The company's financials, even potential risks. It's all here in this prospectus.
So it's high-stakes finance.
Absolutely. The prospectus details Northumbrian's financial history and their projections for the future. What really stands out is the planned investment program.
Okay.
Over the next 10 years, hundreds of millions of pounds to upgrade systems and meet new regulations, and that meant taking on a lot of debt.
That sounds risky. What gave them the confidence to take on all that debt?
They were counting on increased revenue. A key part of that was this thing called K.
Okay.
It's this regulatory factor allowed them to raise prices above inflation.
Okay.
This K factor was super important to their whole plan.
So to make privatization work, they were betting on their ability to hike prices.
Pretty much, yeah.
But what about the people who actually pay those prices?
The customers.
The customers, right?
Yeah.
Would they be on board with that? Did the prospectus address that, like any potential downsides?
Yes, actually, they talk about the uncertainty around these things called abstraction charges.
Abstraction charges.
Basically, those local water companies we talked about, they were in a legal battle with Northumbrian
Okay.
over these charges. And how that all went down could have a huge impact on Northumbrian's costs.
Right.
So their financial projections, a lot less certain.
Okay, so maybe not as straightforward as it first seemed.
Nope.
Taking on debt, relying on price increases,
Yeah.
facing legal challenges. What else were they planning to make privatization work?
Well, it wasn't just about water. They wanted to grow.
Expand.
Yeah. Expand beyond their core services.
Really? What did they have in mind? Like a water park?
Not quite, but they had a subsidiary, Aqua Trading Limited.
Okay.
They bottled and sold mineral water.
Okay.
They also had a trading subsidiary called Northumbrian Services Limited.
Okay.
And get this, they even ran a visitor center.
A visitor center. For water?
Yeah.
That's different. Okay, so they were diversifying. Anything else?
There's one more thing. This is a big one. They were bidding for a cable TV franchise.
Whoa. Wait, from water pipes to cable TV.
Exactly. Shows you how ambitious they were to expand beyond just water.
It makes you wonder about the people working there.
Yeah.
Going from a public service job to a company focused on profit and growth.
Right. And the prospectus does talk about the workforce. They highlight the number of employees,
Right.
their history of union membership, and their commitment to training.
So they were thinking about their employees.
It seems that way, yeah. They recognize the value of their workforce, but privatization often means changes to labor relations. And Northumbrian was moving towards performance-based pay,
Okay.
which, it can be good, rewarding high achievers,
Yeah.
but it also could create more pressure and maybe even widen the gap between the top performers and everyone else.
That's a really good point. So there's that tension between profit and the well-being of the employees.
Exactly.
Was there anything else in the prospectus about how they planned to manage that?
Unfortunately, not really. They don't go into much detail about the downsides of performance-based pay, but they do mention another interesting thing about the workers.
Okay.
Remember those local water companies?
Yeah.
There were concerns about conflicts of interest.
Conflicts of interest.
Yeah. Some employees of Northumbrian Water, they were also directors or shareholders in those other companies.
Oh, okay.
So it raised questions about whether those employees would always act at the best interests of Northumbrian.
Right, because they have ties to other companies.
Exactly.
So even within their own workforce, they were dealing with these complicated relationships.
Yeah.
It's starting to feel like this privatization thing was way more complex than just selling off a company.
You're starting to get it.
We haven't even talked about the environmental side of things.
Right, and that's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Remember, they aren't just providing drinking water, they were also responsible for a ton of sewers and sewage treatment.
Oh, right.
And they had a lot of work to do.
Okay, let's dive into the sewers.
All right.
What challenges were they facing?
Well, for starters, a lot of their sewage treatment works weren't consistently meeting standards.
Standards for what?
Their discharge, meaning the treated sewage wasn't always clean enough before it was released.
Released where?
Back into the environment, rivers, streams.
So they were polluting.
It wasn't ideal, but to be fair, they were working on upgrading those facilities.
That's a huge undertaking.
Absolutely.
Okay, so they knew about the problem and were trying to fix it.
Yeah.
But what about the impact on the environment in the meantime?
Well, the prospectus doesn't really go into detail about, the ecological effects of those discharges.
Okay.
But they do say they were under pressure to improve things.
Improve what?
How they treated sewage and reduce their impact, and this was partly because of new regulations.
New regulations from who?
From the EC Drinking Water Directive, it was setting strict limits on certain substances, like PAHs.
PAHs, what are those?
They're chemicals that can be found in water, and some are known to be carcinogenic.
Oh, okay.
So these new rules meant Northumbrian had to step up their game.
To get these things out of the water.
Right.
So they were facing pressure to clean up and act.
Yeah.
How are they doing in terms of meeting these standards?
This is where it gets technical. The report showed they weren't meeting all the standards for everything. Yet, in some cases, they'd been granted a relaxation.
A relaxation? What does that even mean? Sounds pretty chill for something as important as water quality.
Well, it's not quite as relaxed as it sounds. It's a temporary waiver from meeting a specific water quality standard.
Okay.
The regulator might grant it if they think the company has a plan to get into compliance.
Like a temporary pass.
Yeah, but they still got to get their act together eventually.
What about those cases where they weren't granted a relaxation? How'd they handle those?
They submitted a Section 20 undertaking.
Okay, break that one down for me. What's a Section 20 undertaking?
It's a formal commitment by the company to do certain works to improve water quality and meet those standards.
So a promise to do better.
Exactly. And they were working on lots of things. Upgrading treatment works, replacing old pipes that could leak those PAHs into the water. They were improving disinfection at their service reservoirs, even investing in better monitoring systems.
Wow, it sounds like they had their work cut out for them. All those upgrades, those improvements, they must have been expensive. Did the prospectus talk about how all this would impact their bottom line?
They did. In fact, they were pretty upfront that operating costs were going to rise substantially.
Because of these changes?
Yeah.
But didn't we say earlier they were projecting higher revenues? How does that add up?
Remember that K factor?
Right, the one that let them raise prices?
Exactly. That allowed them to cover these investments.
So the customers would be footing the bill.
It seems that way.
Did they say anything about how customers felt about this? Were they okay with higher water bills?
Unfortunately, no. That's one thing the prospectus doesn't really do.
What's that?
It's focused on the company's side of things, attracting investors. It doesn't go into customer opinions or feedback.
That's a good point. Makes you wonder what those missing voices might have to say about all this.
Definitely. And it highlights that we need to look beyond these documents, consider the bigger picture to get the full story.
Okay, so let's recap.
All right.
We've got Northumbrian Water with ambitious expansion plans, potential conflicts of interest, a workforce facing big changes, and a financial plan that relies on raising prices. And we haven't even gotten to the environmental side of things.
Right. There's one more detail I think is worth mentioning.
Okay, what's that?
It's about those sewage outfalls.
The ones potentially polluting.
Yeah. Most of their treatment works discharge treated water into rivers and streams.
Right.
But they also had some outfalls that discharged directly into the sea.
Wait, they were dumping sewage into the ocean.
Well, not raw sewage, but
still.
these outfalls were operating under concerns.
Okay.
But a lot of them were unconditional and hadn't been reviewed in years.
So they had a free pass to pollute.
Not exactly. Things were changing.
How so?
With the new regulations.
Right.
They were under pressure to improve treatment before discharge and reduce their environmental impact.
Okay, so even their sewage disposal was under scrutiny. Did the prospectus say whether they were ready for these environmental challenges? Were they committed, or was it all talk?
Well, they emphasized their commitment to new technology and improving their operations.
Okay.
But whether those promises turned into real action, that's a question for another deep dive.
You're right. It's easy to get lost in the details. This is just a snapshot in time. There's a whole story about what happened next.
Exactly. The prospectus gives us a glimpse into Northumbrian water right before a huge change. But to really understand what happened, we need to go beyond this. Look at what happened after 1989.
I think we've given our listener a lot to think about already. But you're right, this is just the beginning of the story. So let's come back, and then we'll delve into what happened after privatization. and see how it all played out for Northumbrian Water, its employees, its customers, and the environment. All right, we've gone through all the details of Northumbrian Water's privatization plan. It's a mixed bag. Ambitious plans, potential conflicts of interest, bunch of environmental challenges.
Right.
But this prospectus, it only tells one side of the story.
Exactly. It's like a sales pitch, all about attracting those investors.
Right, highlighted the positives.
Exactly.
What about the people who actually depended on Northumbrian Water?
The customers.
The customers, did their voices even get heard?
That's a great question. I mean, they were the ones paying for all this, all these improvements.
Right, did they have any say?
Well, it's not so clear from this document. The prospectus mentions customer service and their commitment to providing safe, reliable water.
Okay.
But it's all very general, corporate talk, no real insight into how they plan to actually engage with customers
Right.
or address their concerns or even ensure affordability, with potential price hikes and all.
So the customer's perspective is kind of missing.
Yeah, it's kind of a blind spot. Makes you wonder if they were even considered that important in this whole scheme.
Right, stakeholders.
Yeah, and remember, this is the Thatcher era. Big push for deregulation, market-driven solutions.
Okay.
The focus was on efficiency, competition, not necessarily on protecting consumers.
So maybe customer advocacy wasn't really a top priority.
Probably not.
But what about the workers? We talked about those potential downsides of performance-based pay. Did they offer any solutions in the prospectus? Any safeguards for those employees who might be negatively impacted?
Not really. They talked up their employee share schemes as a way for workers to, benefit from the company's success.
Right.
But there's no real discussion of how they would protect workers' rights or ensure fair wages or even prevent potential job losses as they pursued, more efficiency and higher profits.
So it's like they're trying to have it both ways, appealing to investors with promises of lean operations and higher returns, while also telling employees everything will be fine.
Exactly.
Were they really ready to deal with the potential fallout, though, if those two goals clashed?
Good question. And that's something we'd need to look beyond the prospectus to find out. We'd need to see what happened after the privatization.
Right.
Did those share schemes work out? Did workers face job insecurity or, wage stagnation as the company focused on the bottom line?
So more of the story to uncover, like peeling back the layers, and there are more and more questions. Let's go back to the prospectus for a bit. We talked about those expansion plans, specifically the cable TV thing.
Oh, yeah.
It seemed like a big leap going from water to television.
Bold move.
Did they even justify that decision?
They saw it as a way to use what they already had, their existing infrastructure. They had all these pipes and cables all over their service area.
Right.
And they thought, hey, why not use those same channels to deliver cable TV?
So it was all about making the most of what they had.
Right. Maximizing those assets.
But was it a good fit for a water company? Did they have any experience in the telecom industry?
Not that they mentioned in the prospectus.
So they were betting on their ability to learn as they went.
Yeah, and compete in a totally new market.
That sounds super risky.
It was.
Did they even address the challenges, like going up against these big cable companies?
They said it was a competitive market, yes.
Okay.
But they thought they had an advantage.
What kind of advantage?
Being local and having that existing infrastructure.
Okay, so they were confident, or at least they acted like it.
Yeah.
Did they actually pull it off? Did they become a cable TV provider?
That's a whole other story. But it does make you think about their strategy.
Right, like were they trying to do too much too fast?
Exactly. Was this diversification a sign of ambition, or was it more like desperation, trying to find new revenue because they were worried about their core business?
Yeah, hard to say from just this document. It's like we're getting a peek into their heads, but we're missing some key pieces.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so interesting. We're not just reading, we're actively trying to figure things out, questioning what we see, looking for those missing pieces.
Love that. And that's what we're all about here.
Right.
Not just the facts, but what they mean. So let's talk about the environment. We talked about water quality and those sewage treatment upgrades. What about their overall environmental impact? Did they have any kind of plan for sustainability?
That wasn't really a thing back then. The focus was on following the rules, not going above and beyond to minimize their impact.
So doing the bare minimum.
Pretty much. But there is a part where they talk about reducing water leakage.
Water leakage. Why was that such a big deal?
Well, it's a waste of resources,
Okay.
but it also costs them money.
How so?
Remember, they had regulators watching them, and if their leakage was too high, they'd get penalized.
So there was a financial reason to fix leaks.
Right.
But did they ever frame it as an environmental issue?
They did mention it, yeah, that reducing leakage was good for the environment. But the main thing was definitely saving money and staying within the rules.
So even when it was good for the planet, it was really about money?
Seems that way.
Makes you wonder if they'd have even bothered if it wasn't for their bottom line.
Hard to say. But it does make you think about using market forces to drive environmental protection. What are the limitations of that?
Yeah, for sure. It seems like there's a pattern here. Tension between economic goals and other things, like whether customers can afford the service, or worker well-being, or the environment.
You're picking up on something really important here.
Yeah,
This goes to the heart of the whole debate about privatization.
okay.
Was this the best way to handle essential services, like water?
Right,
Did it make things more efficient, lead to innovation like the proponents said it would?
okay.
Or did it just put profits first ahead of people and the planet?
The big questions,
Right.
and probably even more relevant today with climate change and, inequality. We've got to learn from the past, right? Understand what was traded off and make better decisions about how we manage these services in the future.
Totally agree. And I think this deep dive gives us a good place to start.
Okay, we've talked about a lot. Customers, workers, the environment, and that tension between profit and the public good. But there's one more thing.
What's that?
The politics.
Right.
Remember this happened during the Thatcher years? Big ideological shift happening?
Absolutely.
How did that political climate impact the decisions they made?
Great question. Privatization, it wasn't just about economics, right? It was a political project
Okay.
trying to shrink the government, promote free markets.
So more than just selling off a company, it was about changing how the state interacts with its citizens.
Exactly. And it had a big impact on the UK, good and bad.
Okay.
People who liked it, they said it made things more efficient, lowered prices, gave consumers more choice.
Empowering the individual.
Yeah, unleashing the power of the market, that was the idea.
Okay.
But critics, they said it led to job losses, more inequality, and worse public services.
Okay.
They also said it often helped the rich and powerful and left ordinary people behind.
So winners and losers.
Yeah, and it's important to see both sides.
Right.
Privatization was complicated, controversial, and we're still debating it today.
Okay, so another layer of complexity added to our understanding. But we can't forget the human side of it all. We talked about workers. But what about those customers? How was it for them? Going from a public utility to a private company,
Right.
did their bills go up? Did the service change?
That's where it gets really interesting. Remember, the prospectus doesn't tell us much about that.
Right.
So to answer those questions, we have to look beyond this document, see what really happened.
Yeah.
Did Northumbrian deliver on their promises, or did people end up paying more for the same or worse service?
And what about the environmental part? Did those sewage treatment upgrades actually work? Did they reduce pollution, meet the new standards?
Yeah.
And what about their impact overall? Did they really become more sustainable, or was it all talk?
All great questions. We need to investigate further. This prospectus is a start, but clearly there's more to the story.
Like, we have a map, but we still have to actually explore, and I bet this journey will have some surprises.
Oh, for sure. And that's why this is so cool. We're not just repeating old stuff, we're discovering new things
Love it.
and challenging our own ideas.
Well said. And I think our listeners right there with us, eager to see what we find. So let's dig deeper into the aftermath of privatization and see how things turned out for Northumbrian Water, the workers, the customers, and the environment. Okay, we've spent some time now with this Northumbrian Water prospectus
Yeah,
from 1989.
a snapshot.
It really is a snapshot.
Right before a huge shift.
Frozen in time, right before a major change, raises so many questions about what actually happened after this.
It does. We've uncovered a lot of potential problems, like would customers be able to afford the service? What about the workers?
Uh-huh.
What about the environment? And then you've got Thatcher pushing for less regulation, more market-driven solutions.
So much at stake. Did their plans actually work? Did privatization succeed?
Well, it's complicated. Remember that whole cable TV thing?
Oh yeah, bold move.
Didn't quite go as planned.
Really? They ended up selling that part off a few years later.
So maybe sticking to water was the right call. What about the core business, though? Did they improve water quality, meet those environmental standards?
Over time, yeah. They put a lot of money into upgrading things. Their infrastructure, the treatment facilities,
Okay.
tackled those sewage issues, made progress on leaks. They became more efficient, more environmentally sound.
Okay, so that's good. What about the workers, though? Did those employee share schemes work out, or was that just for show?
It's kind of a mixed bag, honestly. Some people benefited, but others, they faced job insecurity, more pressure to perform as the company focused on profits. That shift to performance-based pay, it created winners and losers.
So not a smooth transition for everyone. It seems like Northumbrian Water's privatization is kind of a mini version of the whole debate about privatization in general.
Exactly.
There were good and bad things, planned and unplanned outcomes, lots of complexity. Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's what's important for our listeners to remember. This wasn't about saying privatization was good or bad.
Right.
It was about looking at the details, the trade-offs, the surprises, understanding that these huge economic decisions have a big impact beyond just the money.
Well said. It reminds us that real people are affected by all of this.
Yeah.
The workers, the customers, whole communities, they all have to deal with the consequences.
And their stories often get lost, in the official reports and stuff. So to everyone listening, keep digging.
Yeah.
Look beyond the headlines. Find those missing perspectives.
This has been fascinating, but it's just the beginning. There's so much more to learn about Northumbrian Water. and about what privatization means for societies everywhere.
And those lessons are so important today with all the challenges we're facing, climate change, tech disruption. We need to learn from the past.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, Northumbrian Water's story is a reminder there are no easy answers. Every decision has an impact, and profit should never come before people or the planet.
Couldn't agree more.
Keep asking questions, keep challenging what you think you know, keep diving deep.
History isn't just dates and names.
Right.
It's alive. It's a story. And it's still shaping our world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course. JTEM.